Chapters 22 and 23 of A Fool There Was by Porter Emerson Brown. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 22. Again, the Fairy Story. Catherine, busy at her postscript, did not hear. Blake stepped swiftly forward. "No," he whispered. "No." Eleanor put him aside. "Kate," she said again. Blake stood for a moment, hesitant. Muriel had come from the house. To her he called. "Come here, little partner." Obediently, she came running to him. He seated himself and took her upon his lap. "Do you remember the story that I told you a little while ago?" he asked. She nodded. "Well, there's more to that story. Would you like to hear it?" He did not wait for her answer. He spoke swiftly, surely. Eleanor, across the table, eyed him curiously. Catherine, still writing, was oblivious quite to all that was going on around her. Blake continued. "Well, there came a time when the prince had to go a long, long way off. The princess was very sorry to see him go, and so was the little princess, and they cried. But they were brave princesses, so they didn't cry much. They stayed at home and wrote him letters with kisses in them. And then, well, the fairy prince met a witch, a wicked, wicked witch, and she charmed him and took him away with her. Now the fairy princess had a sister. She was a good woman, and like all good women, she was hard-headed. The sister heard about the witch, and she wanted to run right home as fast as she could and tell all about it. And that would have made the princess cry, and the prince go away and die all alone. The lids over the violet eyes were blinking. The lips quivered. "I want to cry, Mr. Tom," she complained. "That's worse than the other story." "Ah, but," went on Blake hurriedly, "the sister didn't tell. She wasn't hard-headed. She listened to the voice of reason rather than that of intuition." "What's that word you just said, Mr. Tom?" "Intuition?" She nodded. He hesitated then. "Why, intuition is a thing that women use for a brain. And," he continued, "by and by the fairy prince managed to get away from the wicked witch that had charmed him, and he came back again to the fairy princess and the little fairy princess, and though of course he had been very, very bad, very, very wicked, he was forgiven, and they were almost as happy as they had been before he went away. Do you like that story any better, little partner?" She was all smiles now. She nodded brightly. "Heaps and heaps and heaps," she cried. "That's good," he said as he set her down. Catherine had raised her head from her writing. "Fairy story, Tom?" she queried, in the half-attention of preoccupation. "Yes," he replied. "Does it end happily?" Ere he could have replied, her thoughts were again of her letter. Blake walked slowly to where stood Eleanor. She was toying with a hanging blossom of white fragrance spreading. Her eyes were moist, her hand trembled. He asked very softly, "Does it end happily, Nell?" She turned to him. Her lips quivered. "I hope so," she whispered. "Only God himself knows how I hope so." And then she added slowly, "If women were only as loyal to women as men are to men." Chapter 23. Aid. Blake had suspected, but he had refused to believe. Now he knew. And half an hour later, the vagrant, under full head of steam, was surging down the Sound with a great white bone in her teeth and a great fan-like wake spreading huge rollers from her trim stern. She anchored off 34th Street. The launch was ready almost as the chain rattled. Blake's big French car was waiting for him at the pier, and with scant regard for the speed ordinances, it bore him swiftly through the traffic-thronged streets to Lower Fifth Avenue and to the house of Dr. Delancey. The passing of the years had made but little change in either the good doctor or his abode. His office looked the same, dry and musty. He looked the same, shrewd and kindly. "Come in," he said with the testiness that in him was cordiality concentrated. "Come in. Don't stand there like a gump stretching my bell wire all out of shape. Come in, come in." Blake entered. "Well," said the doctor, leading the way into his office, "what's the matter now? Sick? You don't look it. If all my patients were like you and the Schuylers, I'd starve to death." He fumbled with an old-fashioned cedar cigar chest. "Smoke?" Blake took the cigar and lighted it. "Well," said the doctor again, "for heaven's sake, what's the matter? Have you become suddenly dumb? You have a tongue, haven't you? If you have, for goodness sake, use it." Blake answered slowly, "Doctor, it's about Jack Schuyler." The sudden little look of anxiety that sprang to the good old man's eyes showed how much the statement meant to him. "About Jack Schuyler," he exclaimed. "What about Jack Schuyler? No harm. He's not ill." "Very, very ill, I fear," Blake responded. "I don't understand it at all. I can't comprehend—" The doctor brought his old fist down upon the scratched top of his old desk. "Will you stop hemming and hawing and shilly-shallying around and come to the point?" he fairly howled. "It's about Jack Schuyler," repeated Blake slowly, "and a woman." Dr. Delancey started. He sat erect. "What?" he cried. "Jack Schuyler and a woman? You're a fool. It's ridiculous, impossible, absurd." "That's what I've been telling myself for the past month," rejoined Blake. "But it's not ridiculous, it's not impossible, it's not absurd. Would to God it were." "But Jack Schuyler," protested the doctor, incredulously. "Why, I've known him since he was born. And I knew his father and his mother and his grandfather and his grandmother before him. Damn, I don't believe it. I don't believe it." "Neither did I," returned Blake. "Neither would I until—" He told the doctor of the letter that had come, and of that which it contained. In silence the doctor listened, and to the end. There was a pause. Blake continued, "I don't believe I could do anything. I'd lose my head. I want you to go to him, to see if there isn't something that you can do. I'll pay—" The doctor leaped from his chair, wagging an old finger in Blake's face. "Pay?" he yelled. "Pay me for going to Jack Schuyler? You keep your dashed money, my boy. When I want any, I'll ask you for it. Do you hear me? I'll ask you for it. When does the first boat sail?" "It sails tonight, in half an hour," returned Blake. "It's the Vagrant. I'm going too. I want to be near at hand. Good God!" he cried suddenly. It was almost a wail. "To think of Jack Schuyler, our Jack Schuyler, like that!" The doctor came in from the hall whence he had rushed. One arm was in the sleeve of his coat. His hat was over his ear. He was vainly trying to put his left glove on his right hand. "Well," he blurted, "what are you standing there for like a bump on a log? Why don't you get started? What's the matter with you, anyhow? Come on." He turned and shouted up the stairs. "Mary! Mary! Mary!" I say. "I'm going away. Don't know when I'll be back. Ask young Dr. Houghton across the street to take care of my patients until I get home. He'll probably kill a lot of them, but I can't help that." And still shouting, still fussing with glove and sleeve, he bumbled out the door and down the steps to the waiting car. End of chapters 22 and 23.